Just out of curiosity, by a show of hands, how many of you in the audience today have done this before, have lobbied on Capitol Hill? So looks like about half of you. And how many of you enjoyed the experience, by a show of hands? Well, hopefully tomorrow is going to be a wonderful experience for those of you who've done it before and for those of you who've never done it before. And there are no better teachers and advisors than the three panelists seated next to me today. I was adding up collectively the three of these distinguished panelists have over 80 years of legislative wisdom and experience. And we are so happy and so honored to have you today. Senator Lugar, I wanted to start with you if I could. And you took office in 1977. Jimmy Carter was president. There were a few things going on in the world back then. We had some good news. We had the Camp David Peace Accords, which were signed between Israel and Egypt. We also had the biggest energy crisis that our nation had faced. And we also had, a couple years later, the start of the Iranian hostage crisis. Back then, compared with today, international assistance as a percentage of federal spending was more than double, about double what it is today. Help us to understand, because there are a few things happening in the world today, what it is that those conversations, when you were inside the Republican caucus and you were talking to members of your party who didn't see the world the way you did, what were you hearing? What were people saying to you to explain why international assistance should not be as robust as it was back when you first took office?
I think, very frankly, within the Republican caucus, there were those that were deeply involved in foreign affairs, deeply interested. And they were listened to and respected. They did not talk about foreign assistance a great deal. This occurred really within the committee confines. But nevertheless, their leadership was respected. Jack Javits and Chuck Percy come to mind, for example. And these were people who had sought to be on the Foreign Relations Committee, had sought leadership from the beginning. And so they had some latitude. Furthermore, there was less preoccupation, and this understates it, with domestic economic affairs at the time. Essentially, the crisis now with regard to foreign assistance monies, and this has been true of State Department money for many, many years as a larger category, is that the money has gone primarily to the Defense Department, to the point that former Secretary Bob Gates really wanted to give some of it back to the Secretary of State for things that could better be handled there. But leaving aside that, with our constituents, very frequently back home, the preoccupation, certainly since the Great Recession, has been with jobs, with the budget, with the deficit, with domestic affairs. You can go to sometimes open meetings and people will say, it's very nice that you're interested in foreign affairs. We respect that, but we don't want to hear about it. We really want to talk about the budget.
So what would you say in response?
I would say that we still live in a very big world. It's a dangerous world, but one in which through the United States' ability to transport troops everywhere in the world, and we uniquely are able to do that. We're the only country that has a fleet that is in all of the seas, that literally keeps the foreign trade system open for ourselves and for others, that this is our livelihood and our future. So we do spend money on the Defense Department to produce all of the above. But at the same time, we are not going to be successful just with the ships and with the troops going to places if we have not been thoughtful about the rest of the people of the world. I'm impressed, for instance, with an article in The Economist this week, in which they point out in the last 20 years, 1 billion people out of 7 billion on this earth have been moved from the poverty or below poverty level. An extraordinary movement. And we have about 1 billion to go. And as was already recited by Johnny Isaacson so carefully and thoughtfully, so long as there are that number of people out there susceptible to hunger and even starvation on a day-to-day basis, the possibilities for terrorism, for all sorts of mal groups to take hold, are always present. We really have to be facing constantly with others the idea of how do we feed the world, how do we continue the great work with PEPFAR and the anti-polio campaign and so forth that have made such a difference in the quality of life, and they give us some chance, really, of then expressing our thoughts to people who are not really at wit's end.
Ambassador Marilla, we just heard Senator Lugar make an eloquent case for the mission-driven side of the international assistance budget. As the former head of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, I had to look that up because I can never remember what OECD stands for. But as the former U.S. ambassador to the OECD, looking at what's going to take place tomorrow, you've got President Obama, who's about to head off on his second trip to the African continent. But what's different this time than the first time he went is that he's not just bringing his political advisors. He is bringing a delegation of hundreds upon hundreds of American businessmen and women to go with him. Because it's not just about aid, it's about trade. But how is trade smart power for the United States?
It really is. Thank you, Andrea. And first of all, I wanted to say, I'm Connie Morella, and I approve this message. The message also is that the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition does such a great job, and I want to commend all of you for being here and then going to Capitol Hill tomorrow. And I want you to know that one of the reasons I wanted to be here is because Senator Lugar and former Congressman Howard Berman are here. And although Senator Lugar has given 36 years, Congressman Berman has given 30 years, and I've given only 16 in Congress, but then 4 at OECD. OECD came about, Andrea, through the Marshall Plan. It was George Marshall's words for a family of nations that brought together, right now, 34 nations that are the most developed. But they work on best practices to kind of to level the playing field so that businesses in the United States and these other countries will have some of the same rules and regulations and look at the best practices. And so I think going to Africa is brilliant. Now, there's been a lot of controversy about taking a large entourage in terms of the cost, but if you were to weigh the benefits, you would say that the benefits far outweigh whatever the cost may be for security, et cetera. And I think bringing the business community says something about what the benefits can be when you can assist countries in terms of education, in terms of the best business practices, in terms of health. You have stability, and when you have stability, then companies are willing to go there. Trade is a really key element, and I hope that when you go on Capitol Hill, that you do talk about the benefits of trade as foreign assistance is the package that you are concerned about. So we can come up with a scale, and we can show all of the benefits of this particular trip in terms of, as you mentioned, smart power, but bringing the business people gives it a newer dimension, which is so critically important.
And P.S., the Chinese have been doing it for years.
Yes.
Congressman Berman, before you retired from Congress, you worked tirelessly to reform the Foreign Affairs Act of, wait for it, 1961. All right, just to put that in context,
Yeah.
Breakfast at Tiffany's was the hot movie in the box office back then. You also had the U.S. breaking relations with Cuba. You had the start of the civil rights movement. So that just gives you a sense of how long ago. And unfortunately, you weren't able to push it over the goal line. What do you think it's going to take to make that happen? And do you think it's even possible that it'll happen during the second Obama administration?
Breakfast for Tiffany. That was the last good movie, right? No. The issue of the foreign assistance reform issue was born at the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition when Liz Schreier and George Ingram grabbed me about a minute after I had become chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee and said, what are we going to do about this law with its thousands of earmarks, its reference to institutions and entities that didn't exist anymore, its lack of focus and direction for a foreign assistance program. They made a case which I may have worked tirelessly at, but I certainly did not work successfully at, which was to essentially try to rewrite our whole foreign assistance law. But the key issue here is to make, this is such a different time. We've just heard from your questions and what Dick and Connie have said, that foreign assistance isn't just about trying to do good or help people who need help. It is so integrated into a globalized economy, or it needs to be so integrated into a globalized economy where it helps to create the institutions that allow for the trade and the investment. The story of Africa, for some people, it's a very depressing story. It's about Sudan and what's going on in the Congo and the horrors. But if you look closer, you're starting to see leaders in Africa and the people of Africa deeply committed in improving their own lives, willing to take on responsibility for sensible policies, and we have to have a foreign assistance program that incentivizes that has country ownership, that separates the goal of foreign assistance from a particular bilateral U.S. country relationship. For years, we gave billions of dollars to the government of Egypt, sort of as part of the close bilateral relationship, and have no basis for thinking that assistance made a substantial difference either for the Egyptian people or in the capacity of the Egyptian people in the future to get the benefits of better infrastructure. So the purpose here is essentially to make it a program that lays the foundation for the trade and the investment and the growing prosperity, which is in every American's interest. So when we go to our constituents to talk about foreign aid, and first of all, they, as everybody here has heard from the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, they think it's 10 times larger than it really is. And secondly, think it's totally unrelated to their own lives, when in fact, we can see the benefits all over our country of trade and stability around the world where we have it, and how that helps make a more prosperous America. So it's a self-interest issue. Now, your fundamental question is, how do we turn it into reality? And you need a few people deeply committed in a Congress that's willing to sort of bring back the process of legislating rather than sort of dealing with the crisis of the moment in an extraordinary and a way. So when Senator Lugar, when we got into this, he was the greatest supporter of these efforts as the ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. My guess is people like Bob Corker and Johnny Isaacs and others are also people who will see the wisdom of trying to take on this program. And it involves constantly pushing. So part of what I hope when you guys go tomorrow is, in addition to the very specific things you're going to be lobbying on behalf of, which are very important, also some some attention to the larger question of creating country ownership, of reorganizing our own agencies to make the aid more effective, to restore the capacity of USAID to monitor and evaluate our foreign assistance programs. Not so much about how much dollars we spend, but how effectively we spend it.
Speaking of spending those dollars effectively, during your time in Congress, Senator Lugar, you were a leader on trying to end global hunger. The Obama administration just tried and failed to reform U.S. food aid,
Exactly.
much as you had President Bush attempt the same a few years back. What do you think it's going to take to reform food aid, and frankly, do you think that U.S. international food aid assistance needs reforming in the first place?
I believe it needs reform. I strongly supported Rod Shaw and USAID's new idea that much more of the food would be purchased on site where the famines were occurring, or at least close to that point.
Could you explain it to the audience the way it
Essentially,
works?
the idea now is that we have a food assistance program. When a famine occurs, farmers in America, food suppliers are summoned, and food is bought from them. It's put on American ships, and that's been a very important part of the thing legislatively, and conveyed out to the field and distributed there. Now, the thought was that we, in fact, could buy the food in country, thus encouraging farmers at local levels. It would be present 6 or 7 months before it would be present under the current system, while people are starving in the meanwhile, and we would not have the shipping costs. Now, you run flat into, of course, groups that would say, well, we supported all this to begin with because you were buying from American farmers. Secondly, you were paying the freight for American shippers. And that's our interest in the thing. Incidentally, there's some food at the end of the trail for the people. So I would just say simply, it's a good idea. It will have to continue to be pressed, and I think Raj will do so. And while I'm speaking of him, I'm impressed with the fact, I think as you are, that over the course of just the last few years, about 700 people have been trained in USAID to be much more effective in the distribution of foreign aid or in foreign aid programs. And that's come despite budget cuts and all sorts of difficulties. In other words, the expertise involved has been improved very substantially. I think perhaps in this current atmosphere, the program that's been mentioned was fated for difficulty. But even then, and I would advise each of you as you head to the Hill, there are still bills to come, places where amendments might be placed. This is not going to happen in the old-fashioned way by so-called regular order right now. But you take up a bill and everybody knows the whole process. It's much more likely to occur on bills that are so-called essential, and it's still a good idea.
While you all think of your questions, you may have questions right now. I'm just going to throw one more question to our panelists, and then there'll be microphones that are here in the room, and if you just raise your hand, they will bring you microphones. We've got about 16 minutes left, time for a few questions from the audience. I'd like to start with you, Ambassador Morella. What advice do you have for these men and women in the audience today to be most effective in the way that they engage with either their member or a member of their senior staff? What worked with you? I mean, obviously, having somebody from your district makes a big difference. But is there anything in the way, do you need to get right to the point right off the top? Is an example helpful? What would help persuade you? What was most effective?
Well, I think the people who are here are committed, so therefore they're pretty diplomatic, and we're talking about smart power. And so I would say to know what your agenda is. You can't focus on everything throughout the world, but decide what it is that you think is most important, to be pretty concise about it, to listen, to let the staff listen to you too. I always would say, my rod and my staff, they comfort me and prepare the papers for me in the presence of my constituents. But don't underestimate staff, please, because they will have the ear of the member. And so I think be respectful of time too. But I think a point that you should keep in mind is that, I represented a very highly educated district, Montgomery County, Maryland, and yet I can remember at town meetings talking about, even then, reducing the budget deficit. And somebody would say during the Q&A, well, let's reduce the foreign assistance budget. And I'd say, well, tell me, sir, what do you think we spend on the foreign assistance? 25%. And then someone else would say, oh, no, that's too high, it's more like 15%. But I say to you, it's more like 1%. And sometimes members don't even realize that when they're thinking about the various allocations of money. So I would say all of those things: priorities, conciseness, respect for staff and members, and remember that you're talking about a very small part of the budget that gives a lot of benefits.
Congressman Berman, what advice do you have?
In addition to everything that Connie said, with a focus on the conciseness and why it is in our country's interest and their constituents' interest to do this, leave some sense that people from their districts who care about this issue will be watching what they do. We want more accountability and monitoring in our foreign aid programs. We also want it in our representatives. And the notion this isn't a pro forma business, this is the start of a conversation which we'll see, and we will be paying close attention, leaving that impression, and that you're there representing someone more than yourself, but a significant voice in their districts, I think is a useful part of the message done tactfully.
Senator Lugar, a number of those in the audience will be meeting with members of your party, some of whom are not in favor of international assistance. With that hat on, what advice do you have to offer them when they speak to people like Rand Paul, who absolutely, categorically think this is a terrible idea?
Well, I would say you'll have to be very original. But I think the fact is that Rand Paul is only one of several members of our party now who are really opposed to foreign assistance. And it comes down to the fact that they feel that talking about foreign assistance is a trivial pursuit as opposed to getting on to a discussion of the debt ceiling and very large changes in our whole budget structure. So even though we're now in the Congress taking a look at immigration and gun control and the Farm Bill and so forth, they would say, let's get on with the major show. What we came to talk about was the salvation of the country as we see it, and that cannot occur with trillions of dollars of debt, trillions or hundreds of billions of dollars of continued deficit. In other words, it's a preoccupation with that particular situation. So, granted that that's not what you may have come to talk about, the point, I think, is that we're talking today about foreign assistance as something that does assist us in the war against terror, in the dangerous world in which we live, and building up of constituencies abroad that could be very, very helpful. It's smart power as opposed to sending troops in every direction very frequently, and with the loss of life and so forth that's involved in all of this. Rand Paul and others will understand that. I don't want to characterize all of them in one category, but they've read at least the polls that indicate that the American public does not want to be involved right now anymore in Afghanistan. A large majority do not want to be involved in any way in Syria. They do not really want to be involved in anything that may have troops and may have loss of life. And so what we're suggesting is that in the absence of that, in addition to intelligence services and drone strikes and so forth, which are certainly more economical than sending troops, the most humane and satisfying overall way would be to talk about food and talk about opening up trade to, for instance, with the African Opportunity Act. The fact is, this was a great idea for textiles to come from Africa to the United States, often blocked by interests here, but that's the sort of thing that empowers people there to make money, to begin to build businesses. And so we want to talk about trade, and we want to talk about how you get American business into countries. And we've got American students abroad and foreign students here, the telecommunications, smart power that comes through media everywhere, so people have some glimpse of our way of life. These are things that you might talk about.
Wonderful. What would you like to ask our panel? Gentleman right there in the middle of the room. If you could tell us your name, where you're from, please. Thank you. Try turning on the switch. Is there a switch there on the side? There, I think it may be on now. No? Okay, why don't you just try speaking loudly.
So I can speak louder.
Great.
Scream.
My name is David Litt. I'm with the Institute for Defense and Business in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. It's a professional education institution. But I'm also a retired Foreign Service officer, and that's where I would like to direct my question to our panelists. The programs on trade and aid are important, and also our ability to carry out, implement, and execute those through our institutions are similarly important. So what would you advise us as we go out and discuss on the Hill both the programs and support for the institution's human resources in terms of blending our conversation? Are we going to be more receptive on the programs than on hiring more experts in our Foreign Service and in USAID, Department of Commerce? Or can we go equally on both of those tracks? Thank you.
Who'd like to take a stab at that? Congressman Berman?
Well, I'm
Yeah.
a big believer in maintaining and frankly strengthening the capacity of our folks in Washington, and even more importantly in our missions in country, to know what is happening with our aid, to help shape what programs are given priority in a particular country in terms of the needs of the people of that country through the participation of the people in that country in helping to shape those programs. And to me, I think it's a big mistake to dump huge more money into a process without the capacity to help shape, monitor, and evaluate the effectiveness of those programs.
Oversight, transparency are critically important to your constituencies and to the members of Congress. And this comes from the Foreign Service personnel. I have great regard for them because I represented a lot of them in Montgomery County, Maryland, and serving at OECD, those who were posted to that mission were just some of the most committed, hardworking people that I have ever met. But I think when you're talking to the members of Congress, you want to talk about the benefits to their constituency in terms of health, what we can do for stability, the benefits in terms of jobs. We talk about jobs and unemployment. What foreign aid does to create jobs through trade. So I'm thinking of also coming up with tangible benefits that the members can see to assist their country and their constituency.
Senator Lugar?
This is a more broad and comprehensive thought, but during my travels in Asia in the last few months, I've been struck, first of all, by the impression, the so-called pivot strategy, that is sending our fleet out around the South China Sea and elsewhere, has made our participation in the ASEAN group and in APEC. Specifically, what I mean here is that the countries involved, Japan, the Philippines, South Korea, Thailand, Indonesia, are all countries I visit. The leadership is impressed with the fact that we care, and therefore they're paying much more attention to our business needs, quite apart from our political needs. The amount of American investment is increasing. The prosperity in those countries has at least taken a turn for the better. Granted that Japan has its own problems with QE2 and those difficulties, but I would just say I was impressed, for instance, in the Philippines, or Clark Air Force Base, which was closed down a while back. Now there's quite a display of businesses outside there in the woods before you get to the cemetery. Possibility of opening this up again in some various ways. And that was true in Indonesia, a whole discovery of what a great country this country is and how much we can mean to them, and their feeling of neglect before being rather profound. So, to the extent that any of you have knowledge of business situations in these countries, quite apart from the history of these countries, I would express this to members of Congress. They will find this educational, because the fact is that the Indonesian ambassador from our country told me only 2 members of the Senate had visited Indonesia in the last year. Now this despite the fact that our diplomats through ASEAN and others are much more concentrated on this, and we really all need to be as a whole government.
Wonderful. In the back of the room. Yes, your name,
Good morning.
please.
My
Good
name is
morning.
Farman Kaleye. I'm a principal and founder of International Foundation for Justice. I'm an Iranian-American citizen. And the very purpose of me physically here is really colliding of 2 worlds. The American dream and oppressive measures of Iranian regime. And I wanted to bring your focus on the question of Iran. I just got a Twitter statement from Senator Kirk that he would not allow Iran to continue with this rope-a-dope strategy and wear the world power, the world community down. And so I have a lot of questions. Hopefully during this course of next 2 days I will ask that, but I want you to bring a little more focus on how we can consolidate America's founding vision of supporting democratic movements around the world and thus making the world safer.
Mm-hmm. Well, there is a good portion of international assistance that goes towards governance and democracy building, and whether it's the International Republican Institute, the Democratic Institute. Senator Lugar, do you want to respond?
Well, specifically on Iran, this is a critical question in terms of American security, but likewise the future of Iran. Let me just make a few points. First of all, in the previous election in Iran, the State Department did begin to unleash the idea of smart power through iPhones and all sort of communication devices. Young people in Iran caught a hold of that. We got pictures of what was going on in Iran, literally coming back from these phones and so forth.
This was during the Green Revolution.
Yeah. And so we began to find a constituency there of people who really would like to know more about the United States, and we'd like to know more about them. We would like to have more of a sharing. Ultimately, this is going to be very important, although maybe not in the next 2 weeks or so. I would just say that this probably led to a different kind of election this time around, in which there was large participation. Now, great skepticism as to whether Khomeini pays any attention to whoever was elected, but at the same time, some possibilities here that are important. I think that we do need to take a look once again at the possibility for communication of our ideas, and that it makes a difference ultimately in all of this. Now, beyond that, in this country, we need to be having a proper debate. regular order. Let's say all sorts of rumors about how far the nuclear program can go, the enrichment, before it's intolerable and before somebody needs to strike and take it out and so forth. We're talking about war. We're talking about a very large war, not something that is ended in a few days and so forth. We better talk about this in the right way as a country, whether we want to declare war or not. If we do, we ought to have the proper hearings and debate and authority in the Congress on this situation, as opposed to hints here or there that the leadership might do this or that. And because at the same time that we're all taking polls showing we want to be out of every place, our leadership may be talking about how we are going into some place because it's intolerable to have nuclear weapons there, and it may very well be. But this debate hasn't occurred in this country, and it needs to. And the Iranian people need to know that we're having the debate. And we need to be able to communicate, particularly with the young people there who have a stake in the fact that their economy is declining. The sanctions are having an impact. If they are more comprehensive, they will have even more of an impact. And these are at least some random thoughts about the Iranian picture.
Wonderful. Either one of you? Yeah.
We have different objectives with our Iran policy. The Iran's nuclear weapons program, I think, is justifiably a very high concern for the American government and for the international community, because the implications of Iran having a nuclear weapon, there are many of them. By the way, and I don't think, well, I think them using it always has to be considered. That isn't the first reason of concern. It's how it alters the balance of power in that part of the world, the death of the non-proliferation regime, the inevitability that a number of other countries in the region then will seek to get nuclear weapons. So it's a high priority. But we also have other priorities with Iran, their support for international terrorism, and what the questioner raised, which is the nature of authoritarian rule, the suppression of the people and their rights. And Senator Lugar was right. We have started in some smart ways, even notwithstanding all the different sanctions and all of that, to try and help enable the Iranian people to be able to both get information and give reporting of what is happening inside Iran. It's very complicated. I think this administration is actually handling it sort of right. We are using different tools in our authority to build an international coalition, not an America go-it-alone program, but an international coalition to apply pressure on the regime with the hopes of reaching a diplomatic resolution which can give confidence that Iran's nuclear weapons program has ended. And that's the strategy. Part of that involves the implication that this is serious enough that all options remain on the table, including a military option. And the question is whether this strategy can be successful. I don't think any of us know for sure. There were interesting signs in this last election that the candidate, the irony is in Iran, we are so estranged from the government of Iran and have been now since the revolution there. And what polling is available shows that in that part of the world, there are no people that are more pro-Western, pro-American than the Iranian people. Yeah. It makes one think that there is an inverse relationship between how close we are to a government and how much the people of the country like us. So, I mean, this is you touch on a very important issue. How in the end, one part of our foreign policy goals are to promote what we consider to be universal values regarding the right of people to choose their own form of governance and some basic fundamental human rights that no government should be able to stifle. And we always have to remember that how you successfully pursue that is very much a subject of debate now as we watch what's going on in the different springtimes that are occurring around the world, so to speak.
I know our conversation has been very, very heavy thus far, and in our remaining couple of minutes here, I've been asked to have a little lighter end to our panel. And if you'll humor me, I've been asked to do a very, very short actor's studio. And I'm going to ask you if you've ever seen this program on PBS, and I love it. At a certain point during the interview, they are asked just to give a one-word answer. So I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions just to show another side of our distinguished panel. And just beginning with you, Ambassador Morella, favorite movie, recent movie?
Okay. I think it was 42. That was the Robinson story, which is really great.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, really
Congressman
very
Berman?
Anything done by Quentin Tarantino, the vulgar violence really.
Senator Lugar?
That was a movie about Iran, and I can't remember the name of it now. The Academy Award winner.
Argo.
Argo.
Oh, yeah, that was a terrific
Yeah.
movie. Favorite book, Ambassador Morella?
Well, you know, right now I'm finishing up Olympia Snow's book on Common Ground, because it's what we've lived through from her perspective.
Congressman Berman, what are you reading now?
I'm trying to choose between Ken Pollock's new book
It's my husband. Okay, it's coming out in September on Iran.
and Texas Hold'em for Dummies.
Senator Lugar?
Well, I've been reading David Hamburg's new book, Let Peace Have a Chance, and a wonderful new biography of C.S. Lewis.
And final question, favorite swear word?
That would be under my breath, so I wouldn't dare use it here.
What letter does it begin with?
What incrimination that is.
Do you think you have Rahm Emanuel on the panel?
Exactly.
All right. Any takers?
I defer to the gentleman.
Right.
Too heavy.
Too heavy. Congressman Berman?
Yes.
Well, listen, I want to thank all three of you for a fascinating discussion, for taking the time to come here today. And I, as a board member of USGLC, want to offer also my sincere thanks to each and every one of you for taking time out of your lives to come to DC and lobby on behalf of this incredibly important issue. Thank you so much.
And good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.